Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing danger, it's in carrying a terrible secret until someone finally listens. Deep in Montana's Glacier National Park, where ancient pines whisper secrets older than civilization itself, Marcus Bear McKinnon thought he'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at him. 30 years as a mountain guide had taught him to read the signs: broken branches, disturbed earth, the subtle language of a forest in distress. But nothing had prepared him for the muffled cries echoing from beneath the earth on that crisp October morning. Following the sound to an overgrown root cellar hidden beneath decades of fallen leaves, Marcus discovered Eleanor Whitmore bound with rope, her wheelchair toppled beside her. The 67-year-old woman had vanished from her care facility 9 days earlier, sparking the largest search operation in the park's history. Yet when Marcus cut her free, Eleanor didn't thank him. She begged him to keep digging. "They buried the truth with Jimmy Clearwater," she whispered, her weathered hands pointing to a spot beneath the cellar floor. "And they've been hunting me ever since." What Marcus unearthed that day would shatter everything he believed about justice, loyalty, and the price of keeping deadly secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus McKinnon had pulled more than his share of people out of impossible situations: stranded hikers, lost hunters, the occasional fool who thought they could outsmart a grizzly with bear spray and bravado. But as he crouched beside Eleanor Whitmore in that damp root cellar, her cryptic words hanging in the stale air like morning fog, every instinct honed by 3 decades in these mountains screamed that this was different. The woman's eyes held a clarity that cut through the gloom of her underground prison. Not the glazed confusion of hypothermia or the wild desperation of someone who'd spent 9 days as a captive. This was the steady gaze of someone who had been waiting. "Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. He'd already radioed the search team, and their voices crackled through his handheld radio like distant thunder. 20 minutes, maybe 30, before the cavalry arrived. "You've been missing for over a week. People are worried sick." Eleanor's weathered fingers wrapped around his wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand. I wasn't taken. I came here." Her voice carried the weight of decades, each word measured and deliberate. 43 years I've been planning this moment." Marcus studied her face in the filtered light streaming through the cellar's opening above. Deep lines mapped a lifetime of worry around her eyes, and her silver hair, though disheveled from her ordeal, was pinned back with the precision of someone who'd maintained dignity even in captivity. She wore a thick wool coat over what looked like pajamas, hardly the outfit of someone who'd planned an expedition into the wilderness. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're in shock," he said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "Let's focus on getting you somewhere warm. Eleanor." She released his wrist and pointed again to the earthen floor beneath them. "And if you don't help me finish this, Jimmy Clearwater will have died for nothing." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Every local knew the story, or thought they did. Jimmy Clearwater, the young Blackfeet Park ranger who disappeared during the summer of 1981. His body was never found, and the official reports cited everything from a hiking accident to a possible bear attack. The case had haunted the Park Service for decades, becoming the kind of cautionary tale veterans shared with rookies about the wilderness's unforgiving nature. "How do you know about Jimmy Clearwater?" Marcus asked. Eleanor's smile held no warmth. "Because I'm the one who watched them kill him." The radio crackled to life, rescue coordinator Sarah Chen's voice cutting through the tension. "Bear, what's your status? We've got paramedics en route to your position." Marcus keyed the mic, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Copy that, Sarah. Subject is conscious and alert." He paused, weighing his words. "But we might need some additional time here." "Negative, Bear. Orders are to extract immediately. The family's been through enough." "Family?" Eleanor's voice sharpened. "What family?" "I don't have any family left." Marcus held up a hand for silence as Sarah's voice continued through the radio. Her nephew flew in from Seattle yesterday. He's been coordinating with local authorities. The color drained from Eleanor's already pale face.
"I don't have a nephew," she whispered. "My brother died childless in Vietnam."
A chill that had nothing to do with the October air settled over Marcus. He'd built his reputation on reading people the same way he read weather patterns and animal tracks, and everything about Eleanor Whitmore's terror felt authentic. The tremor in her voice, the way her hands unconsciously gripped the rope that had bound her as if seeking something familiar to hold on to. These weren't the reactions of someone suffering from dementia or exposure-induced confusion. "Ma'am, are you certain about that?" "My brother Tommy enlisted in '68, died at Khe Sanh 6 months later." Her voice was steady now, each detail delivered with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed these facts like a prayer. "Never married, never had children. I was the only one at his funeral." The sound of voices echoed through the forest above them, the search team closing in. Marcus made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew his by-the-book reputation. Instead of calling out their location, he moved deeper into the cellar's shadows, motioning for Eleanor to stay quiet. "Tell me about Jimmy Clearwater," he said softly. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that she'd apparently been holding back for 4 decades. Jimmy found something he shouldn't have. Government documents that proved the Park Service had been falsifying environmental reports, covering up contamination from old mining operations. "He came to me because—" She hesitated, as if the next words might damn them both. "Because I was the one who gave him the documents in the first place." "Why you?" "Because in 1981, I wasn't Eleanor Whitmore." Her voice dropped barely above a whisper. "I was Eleanor Fitzgerald, administrative assistant to the regional director of the National Park Service, and I was Jimmy's informant." The voices above grew closer, boots crunching through fallen leaves and pine needles. Marcus pressed himself against the cellar's earthen wall, his mind racing through 43 years of carefully constructed normalcy that was about to crumble. He thought of his cabin on Flathead Lake, the morning coffee routine that had anchored every day for the past decade, the predictable rhythm of seasonal guide work that paid the bills and kept him sane. Simple, clean, uncomplicated. Everything this woman was about to destroy. "Eleanor Fitzgerald," he repeated, testing the name. "The assistant who disappeared the same week as Jimmy Clearwater." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "They said I'd gone hiking, never came back. Another tragic accident in beautiful Glacier National Park." Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. "I spent 3 days hiding in these woods before I realized they weren't looking for me to rescue me. The search teams were looking for a body to bury." Eleanor's voice carried the weight of someone who'd lived with this truth for decades, or evidence to destroy. "I never knew which." Marcus checked his watch, a habit ingrained by years of managing client expeditions, keeping track of weather windows, calculating daylight hours. 3:47 p.m. In his normal world, he'd be wrapping up a day hike with tourists from Minneapolis or Calgary, maybe sharing stories around a campfire while dinner cooked over propane flames. His clients always wanted the same things: a brush with authentic wilderness, a few Instagram-worthy photos, and the comfort of knowing their guide could handle any crisis that arose. Crisis management was his specialty. Lost hikers, broken ankles, sudden weather changes, problems with solutions, challenges that could be overcome with experience and proper equipment, not decades-old conspiracies involving murder and government cover-ups. "The nephew," Marcus said. "If you don't have family, then whoever he is, he's been waiting for me to surface." Eleanor struggled to her feet, her movements stiff from hours bound in the cold cellar. Probably had alerts on every system: hospitals, police reports, missing persons databases. The moment I disappeared from that assisted living facility, he would have known. Marcus thought of his own carefully managed isolation. No wife, no children, no extended family that expected Sunday dinners or holiday visits. Just his reputation as the most reliable wilderness guide in northwest Montana, built one successful expedition at a time. Clients recommended him because he was thorough, professional, and discreet. Celebrities and politicians hired him because Marcus McKinnon minded his own business and forgot whatever conversations happened around campfires after dark. That reputation was his life's work. It provided his livelihood, his identity, his sense of purpose, and it required absolute trust from the authorities who issued his permits and referred clients his way. "Bear?" Sarah's voice crackled through the radio again, closer now. "We've got your GPS coordinates. ETA 3 minutes. Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Whatever happens next, you can't let them take me back to Kalispell. Not to that facility, not to that man claiming to be family. Please." The desperation in her voice reminded Marcus of a moose he'd once found, caught in old mining cable, thrashing against bonds that only tightened with struggle. Sometimes the kindest thing was to cut the animal free, even when it might bolt into traffic. Sometimes freedom was worth the risk, but sometimes the animal was dangerous, and compassion could get you killed. Marcus had built his life on careful judgment, measured risks, and maintaining just enough distance to stay objective. He guided people through wilderness challenges, then sent them home to their own lives while he returned to his. No entanglements, no ongoing obligations, no messy emotional investments that could cloud his judgment when the next crisis arose. He looked at Eleanor Whitmore, or Eleanor Fitzgerald, and saw 43 years of careful hiding about to unravel. She'd created a new identity, a new life, probably convinced herself she could live quietly with her secrets until natural death made the choice for her. Marcus understood that impulse. He'd been living his own version of careful isolation since his army discharge, choosing the mountains over people, clients over relationships, professional respect over personal connections. The difference was that his secrets were ordinary. Garden-variety PTSD, a failed marriage, a drinking problem he'd conquered through geographic relocation and rigid routine. Her secrets could apparently get people killed. The sound of approaching boots grew closer, accompanied by the rustle of equipment and low voices coordinating the extraction. In 90 seconds, maybe less, this choice would be made for him. "The documents," Marcus said quietly, "the ones Jimmy found. Are they here?" Eleanor nodded toward the back corner of the cellar, where shadows swallowed the earthen walls, wrapped in plastic, buried 18 inches down. 43 years of evidence that people in very high places would still kill to keep hidden. Marcus McKinnon looked at his hands, steady hands that had guided thousands of people safely through dangerous terrain, hands that had never failed him when lives hung in the balance. Tomorrow, those same hands might be digging up proof of murder and conspiracy instead of breaking camp for another routine expedition. His ordinary world was about to end. The voices above them stopped. Marcus held his breath, feeling Eleanor tense beside him. Through the narrow opening of the root cellar, he could see boots, expensive hiking boots, not the worn leather of the search and rescue team he'd been expecting. These were pristine, barely broken in, the kind wealthy weekend warriors bought at REI and wore twice. "Bear McKinnon?" The voice carried authority wrapped in false concern. "Sarah Chen said you'd located Mrs. Whitmore." Marcus kept silent, his finger hovering over the radio transmit button. Something was wrong. Sarah hadn't mentioned anyone else joining the search, and protocol dictated that only certified rescue personnel approach extraction sites. His military training kicked in. When details don't match the briefing, assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. Eleanor's fingernails dug into his forearm. Her eyes were wide with recognition and terror. "That's him," she whispered, barely audible. "David Morrison. He was Jimmy's supervisor in 1981. The boots moved closer to the cellar opening, joined by a second pair. Marcus caught a glimpse of pressed khaki pants and a Park Service windbreaker that looked fresh from the package. Morrison would be in his 70s now, but apparently still capable of hiking into remote terrain to clean up old messes. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Morrison called down into the cellar, his voice echoing off the earthen walls. "We're here to help. Your nephew is very worried about you." Eleanor shook her head frantically, pointing toward the back corner where the documents lay buried. She mouthed the word evidence and made a digging motion with her hands. Marcus understood. Whatever was down there, Morrison couldn't be allowed to find it. The second voice spoke, younger, unfamiliar. "Sir, the GPS shows Missy Kinnon's radio transmission came from this exact location. They have to be here." Marcus's mind raced through options. The cellar had only one exit, and two men stood directly above it. He could try to climb out fighting, but Eleanor was bound and couldn't move quickly. He could radio for backup, but Morrison clearly had enough authority to intercept communications. Or he could stay hidden and hope the men moved on. None of those options addressed the larger problem. If Morrison had tracked them here, he had resources Marcus couldn't match. Government connections, unlimited funding, and 43 years of experience burying inconvenient truths. "Check the other cellars," Morrison ordered. "There are 3 more root cellars within 100 yards. Old homestead from the 1920s. The boots moved away, but Marcus knew it was temporary. They'd be back with better equipment, more men, and a systematic search pattern that would find them within hours. Eleanor tugged on his sleeve and pointed to her throat, then to the radio. She wanted him to contact the real rescue team. Marcus shook his head. Morrison was clearly monitoring communications, probably had been since Eleanor first went missing. Every transmission would give away their position and intentions. His ordinary world wasn't just ending, it was being systematically dismantled by forces he didn't understand. Marcus thought of his reputation, built over 15 years of flawless expedition leadership. Corporate executives trusted him with million-dollar deals discussed around campfires. Government officials hired him for discreet hunting trips where policy was shaped over morning coffee and elk steaks. His client list read like a who's who of Montana's political and business elite. That reputation depended on absolute neutrality. He guided people through wilderness challenges, kept their secrets, and never asked uncomfortable questions about why certain conversations had to happen away from offices and recording devices. His value was his discretion, his ability to fade into the background while powerful people made decisions that shaped the state's future. Helping Eleanor would destroy all of that. Morrison clearly had enough influence to end Marcus's guide permits, blacklist him with clients, and turn his life's work into a cautionary tale about guides who couldn't mind their own business. But as Eleanor gripped his arm with desperate strength, Marcus remembered something his army sergeant had told him during a particularly brutal training exercise in Afghanistan. "Son, the moment you start calculating whether doing right is worth the cost, you've already lost the only thing that matters." The boots were returning, accompanied by the metallic scrape of equipment being unpacked. Marcus made his choice. He keyed the radio, speaking barely above a whisper. "Sarah, this is Bear. Do not approach my coordinates. Repeat, do not approach. Unknown individuals on site claiming Park Service authority. Send sheriff's deputies to GPS coordinates. I'm texting you now." Eleanor's eyes widened as she realized what he was doing. He was choosing her truth over his carefully constructed life, her 43-year burden over his professional survival. His hands were already moving toward the back corner of the cellar, toward 18 inches of earth that held evidence someone had killed to protect. Tomorrow, if they lived that long, Marcus McKinnon would learn exactly how dangerous truth could be. Above them, Morrison's voice carried a new edge of urgency. "Find them, now." Marcus's hands froze inches from the earthen floor. The weight of what he'd just committed to crashed over him like an avalanche, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. His radio transmission to Sarah had crossed a line he could never uncross. He'd just declared war on people with the power to destroy everything he'd built. The metallic scraping above continued, punctuated by Morrison's clipped orders to his companion. They were setting up equipment, probably ground-penetrating radar or infrared scanners, professional tools for a professional cleanup operation that had been 43 years in the making. "What the hell am I doing?" Marcus pressed his back against the cellar wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't a lost tourist or a twisted ankle on a day hike. This was the kind of situation that ended careers, destroyed lives, and got people buried in unmarked graves. He was a wilderness guide, not some action hero from Eleanor's conspiracy theories. Eleanor watched him with desperate hope, as if she could see the doubt creeping across his features in the dim light. Her grip on his arm loosened, and he recognized the expression. She'd seen that look before, probably on Jimmy Clearwater's face right before they killed him. The moment when ordinary people realized they were in over their heads. I could still radio Morrison, Marcus thought. Tell him I found a confused old woman with dementia. Hand her over, collect my finder's fee, go back to guiding rich tourists through pretty forests. His satellite phone vibrated with an incoming text from Sarah Bear, county sheriff en route, but 45 minutes out. Morrison called in federal authority override. Says you're interfering with ongoing investigation. Orders are to cooperate fully. The words hit him like a physical blow. Federal override meant Morrison had enough juice to make local law enforcement back down. Sheriff's deputies wouldn't help. They'd be ordered to assist in Eleanor's transfer to Morrison's custody. Marcus had miscalculated completely. He'd assumed his radio call would bring legitimate help. But Morrison was already 3 steps ahead. Of course he was. He'd been playing this game since before Marcus got out of diapers. Federal override, Eleanor whispered, reading over his shoulder. Her face went ashen. That means they've elevated this to national security. National security? You were a filing clerk. I was a filing clerk with access to regional director communications. Do you know what was happening in 1981? Environmental Protection Agency was brand new, still figuring out enforcement. Every mining company, logging operation, and development corporation in the West was scrambling to hide 40 years of contamination before the feds started requiring cleanup. The scraping sounds above stopped. Marcus heard Morrison's voice, calm and professional. McKinnon. This is Deputy Director Morrison, National Park Service. We know you're down there. Mrs. Whitmore needs immediate medical attention. Eleanor shook her head frantically, pointing to herself and mouthing, I'm fine. But Marcus could see she wasn't fine. Hours of being bound in near-freezing temperatures had taken their toll. Her lips carried a blue tinge, and her hands trembled from more than fear. Maybe Morrison was right. Maybe Eleanor did need medical attention more than she needed to dig up documents that might be meaningless after 43 years. Maybe the kindest thing would be to help her up that ladder and into a warm ambulance. Let the professionals sort out her accusations later. Who am I kidding? There wouldn't be a later. Eleanor Whitmore would disappear into the system, another elderly woman with dementia who wandered away from assisted care. The documents would disappear too, along with any evidence that Jimmy Clearwater had been murdered. Marcus thought of his cabin on Flathead Lake, the mortgage he'd finally paid off last spring, his equipment shed filled with 15 years of accumulated gear, tents, climbing ropes, first aid supplies, everything he needed to run his business. His truck, his boat, his reputation with the outfitters who referred clients, a simple life he'd built one careful decision at a time. All of it depended on staying in everyone's good graces. Park Service officials, local law enforcement, the wealthy clients who expected their guide to be reliable, discreet, and predictable. Marcus McKinnon was the safe choice, the guy who brought people home without complications or uncomfortable questions. Morrison's offering you a way out, Eleanor said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Take it. You don't owe me anything. But Marcus was remembering something else. His sergeant used to say, the military teaches you to follow orders, son. Real life teaches you when not to. He'd followed orders in Afghanistan until the day his unit was told to look the other way while contractors dumped chemical waste near a village well. Marcus had filed a report anyway, thinking someone upstairs would care that children were getting sick. Instead, he'd been transferred to a desk job and quietly encouraged to take early discharge. 30 years later, that Afghan village was probably still poisoned, and Marcus had spent the last decade telling himself he'd learned to pick his battles more carefully. How many people died because those documents stayed buried? He asked Eleanor. Her voice was barely audible. I don't know. Mining runoff, groundwater contamination, cancer clusters in downstream communities. Jimmy tried to calculate the numbers before she couldn't finish the sentence. Above them, Morrison's patience was wearing thin. Mr. McKinnon, you're interfering with federal operations. Come up now and we'll forget about the unauthorized radio transmission. Marcus looked at his hands again. Hands that had pulled injured climbers off cliff faces. Hands that had dug survivors out of avalanche debris. Hands that had never failed to act when someone needed help. Eleanor wasn't just someone. She was everyone who'd been poisoned by the contamination Morrison had helped cover up. His choice was made before he consciously realized it. Marcus began clawing at the earthen floor in the cellar's back corner, his fingernails scraping against decades of compressed soil. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she understood what he was doing. He was choosing her truth over his carefully constructed life, her 43-year burden over his professional survival. 18 inches down, she whispered, wrapped in plastic. Above them, the scraping sounds resumed with new urgency. Morrison had stopped negotiating. Marcus's fingernails split against the packed earth, blood mixing with 43 years of accumulated soil. Each scrape of his hands carried the weight of absolute commitment. There would be no explaining this away as a misunderstanding. He was actively obstructing a federal investigation, destroying evidence, and aligning himself with a woman who might be delusional. The rational part of his mind catalogued everything he was sacrificing with each handful of dirt. His guide permits would be revoked before sunset. The corporate executives who hired him for discreet hunting expeditions would distance themselves so fast they'd leave scorch marks. His reputation as the reliable, no-questions-asked wilderness professional was dissolving with every second he spent digging in this cellar instead of handing Eleanor over to Morrison. But his hands kept moving. 15 inches, Eleanor whispered, watching him work with desperate intensity. The plastic should be blue, heavy construction grade. Above them, Morrison's voice carried a new tone of controlled fury. Bring the excavation equipment. We're going in. The sound of heavy machinery being unpacked filtered down through the cellar opening. Portable winches, probably pneumatic tools, professional grave robbing equipment, Marcus realized grimly. Morrison hadn't come prepared for a simple elderly woman extraction. He'd come equipped for major excavation work, which meant he'd always known exactly what Eleanor had buried here. This had been a trap from the beginning. He's been watching me, Eleanor said, confirming Marcus's suspicion. The assisted living facility, the nephew who doesn't exist, the convenient window of opportunity when I could slip away. Morrison needed me to lead him to the exact location because the homestead covers 12 acres. Marcus's fingers hit something solid. Not the plastic wrapping Eleanor had described, but something metallic and cold. He scraped away more earth, revealing the corner of what looked like a military surplus ammunition box. That's not what we buried, Eleanor breathed. Jimmy and I used a plastic document tube. The implications crashed over Marcus like ice water. Someone had been here before them, recently, judging by how easily the box lifted from its shallow grave. Morrison hadn't just been monitoring Eleanor, he'd been monitoring the site itself, probably for decades. The box's lock had been cut, the contents removed. Inside, Marcus found only a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Miss Fitzgerald, your insurance policy expired in 1995 when the last witness died of natural causes. Thank you for leading us to the exact coordinates. DM. Eleanor read the note over his shoulder, her face crumbling as 43 years of careful planning disintegrated. The documents are gone. Jimmy died for nothing. I've been hiding my whole life for nothing. Marcus stared at the empty box, understanding the full scope of Morrison's operation. The man hadn't just been covering up environmental crimes, he'd been systematically eliminating every trace of evidence and every person who might threaten the secret. Eleanor had been allowed to live only as long as she served a purpose, revealing the location of the buried evidence. Now that purpose was fulfilled. The sound of machinery stopped abruptly, replaced by boots moving toward the cellar, opening with military precision. Multiple sets this time. Morrison had called in reinforcements. Marcus looked at Eleanor's tear-streaked face and saw his own death reflected there. They'd both become loose ends in a conspiracy that had already claimed Jimmy Clearwater and God knew how many others. Morrison would eliminate them with the same methodical efficiency he'd used to retrieve the documents. But something in Marcus's chest was expanding rather than contracting. Instead of the crushing despair he'd expected, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his army days, the fierce clarity that came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. His old life was already over. His reputation, his business, his carefully maintained neutrality, all of it was gone the moment he'd keyed that radio and chosen Eleanor's side. Morrison would make sure of that whether they lived through the next hour or not, which meant Marcus was finally free to stop calculating costs and start acting on principle. "The note mentions other witnesses," he said quietly, studying Morrison's message. "People who died of natural causes between 1981 and 1995. That's not just evidence tampering, that's serial murder." Eleanor nodded slowly. Jimmy wasn't the first Park Service employee to ask uncomfortable questions. 3 others transferred to remote postings and died in accidents. A boat capsizing in Alaska, a climbing fall in Colorado, food poisoning during a solo camping trip. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone, fingers moving with steady purpose. Morrison might have federal override authority with local law enforcement, but he couldn't monitor every communication channel simultaneously. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Something I should have done 20 years ago," Marcus replied, composing a message to every investigative journalist, environmental lawyer, and congressional oversight contact in his phone. The same people he'd spent years avoiding, the ones who might have uncomfortable questions about his wealthy clients' wilderness conversations. "I'm burning it all down." The boots reached the cellar opening just as Marcus hit send. Muzzle flashes erupted above them, like deadly fireworks, as Marcus grabbed Eleanor's wheelchair and dragged it behind the cellar's thickest support beam. Splinters exploded from the wooden ladder as automatic weapons chewed through the opening where they'd been standing seconds before. "Suppression fire!" Marcus shouted over the deafening roar, his military training flooding back. "They're not trying to kill us yet, just keeping us pinned while they position." Eleanor clutched his arm, her face pale but determined. "The back wall," she gasped. "There's a drainage tunnel Jimmy and I used, leads to the creek bed." Marcus squinted through the gun smoke and debris. The tunnel opening was barely visible, a gap in the stone foundation just wide enough for a person to crawl through. But Eleanor's wheelchair would never fit, and he couldn't carry her that distance. The shooting stopped abruptly. Morrison's voice echoed down with chilling professional calm. "Mr. McKinnon, you've just committed federal crimes that carry life sentences. Surrender now and we'll discuss terms." "What kind of terms?" Marcus called back, buying time while he studied their options. "The kind where you wake up tomorrow." Eleanor shook her head frantically, pressing something into Marcus's palm, a small metal key attached to a leather cord. "Safe deposit box," she whispered. "First National Bank, Kalispell. Box 247. Jimmy made copies before we buried the originals." Marcus stared at the key as understanding hit him. "You've had backup evidence this whole time?" "Insurance policy. If anything happened to the buried documents, the bank copies would surface after my death." Eleanor's smile was grim. "Morrison's been chasing shadows for 43 years. Above them, Marcus heard the distinctive whine of a gas-powered generator starting up. Then came the mechanical hum of what sounded like a winch system being lowered into the cellar. Professional extraction equipment. Morrison was done negotiating. Marcus's phone buzzed with incoming messages. His blast transmission was generating responses faster than he'd anticipated. "Marcus, Senator Williams' Oversight Committee wants immediate contact. This is huge. Janet Sterling, Washington Post. Bear, got your message. FBI Field Office Billings has been alerted. Stay alive. Tom Chen, Environmental Legal Defense. McKinnon, if this is real, we're talking front-page national coverage. Can you provide documentation? Mike Torres, 60 Minutes. Morrison's operation is unraveling, Marcus told Eleanor. Federal oversight, media attention. He can't just disappear us now. Yes, he can. Eleanor's voice carried 4 decades of bitter experience. An unfortunate accident during a rescue operation. Elderly woman with dementia, confused guide who got in over his head. 2 tragic deaths that couldn't be prevented. The winch cable dropped through the opening, followed by a figure in tactical gear rappelling down with military precision. Not Morrison, younger, faster, carrying suppressed weapons and night vision equipment, a professional cleaner. Marcus pressed himself against the wall as the operative touched down, automatically scanning for targets. The man's movements were fluid, experienced. This wasn't his first cellar cleanup. But the tunnel Eleanor had mentioned might be their advantage. Marcus had spent 15 years navigating Montana's underground cave systems, and he could move through spaces that would challenge younger, bulkier operatives. When I say go, head for that drainage tunnel, Marcus whispered to Eleanor. I'll create a distraction. I can't walk, Marcus. You can crawl. I've seen you move. You're stronger than you pretend. Marcus gripped the empty ammunition box Morrison had left behind. On 3, the operative was advancing methodically, sweeping the cellar with professional thoroughness. But he was moving like someone who expected cowering victims, not resistance from a former army specialist who'd survived Afghanistan firefights. Marcus hurled the metal box at the overhead light, plunging the cellar into darkness just as Eleanor began pulling herself toward the tunnel entrance. The operative's night vision gave him an advantage, but Marcus knew this cellar's layout now. Every beam, every stone, every shadow. He rolled left as suppressed gunfire erupted where he'd been standing, then launched himself at the operative's legs in a tackle that sent both men crashing into the stone wall. The impact jarred loose decades of accumulated dirt from the ceiling, creating a choking cloud that interfered with the night vision equipment. Wrestling for control of the weapon, Marcus felt the man's training. Special forces, probably former Delta. But Marcus had something the operative lacked, desperate motivation fueled by righteous fury. His knee found the operative's solar plexus just as Eleanor disappeared into the drainage tunnel. The man doubled over, gasping, and Marcus grabbed the dropped weapon while scrambling toward the tunnel entrance. "McKinnon!" Morrison's voice carried new urgency from above. "My operative missed his check-in. You're only making this harder on yourself." Marcus squeezed into the narrow tunnel after Eleanor, feeling decades of accumulated debris scrape against his shoulders. Behind them, the cellar filled with the sound of additional operatives rappelling down. They weren't escaping Morrison's reach. They were entering a larger maze where the rules were about to change completely. But for the first time in hours, Marcus felt like he was playing offense instead of defense, and Eleanor's key was still clutched in his fist. The drainage tunnel was smaller than Marcus had hoped, a limestone passage barely 3 feet high that forced them into an exhausting hands and knees crawl through ankle-deep water. Eleanor moved with surprising determination, her arms pulling her forward while her legs dragged uselessly behind. But Marcus could hear her breathing becoming labored, see her strength failing with each yard they covered. Behind them, flashlight beams began penetrating the tunnel entrance. Morrison's operatives had found their escape route. "How far to the creek?" Marcus whispered, his voice echoing off wet stone. "Quarter mile," Eleanor gasped. "Maybe less. Jimmy and I only used it once." The tunnel branched ahead, 2 passages splitting off into darkness. Eleanor hesitated, disoriented after decades, and Marcus realized they could easily get lost in this underground maze, while Morrison's team systematically searched every route. His satellite phone buzzed against his chest. Another message had come through despite the stone overhead. Marcus checked it quickly, hoping for word that federal authorities were mobilizing. Instead, he found something that made his blood freeze. "Mr. McKinnon, your media contacts have been advised this involves national security. All communications suspended pending investigation. You're on your own. Unknown number." Morrison's reach extended further than Marcus had imagined. The man could silence congressional oversight committees, muzzle investigative journalists, and lock down federal agencies with a few phone calls. 43 years of building influence had given him nearly untouchable power. "They're shutting down our support," Marcus told Eleanor. "Morrison's killing the story before it breaks." Eleanor stopped crawling, slumping against the tunnel wall. Then Jimmy was right. The system protects itself. Truth doesn't matter when powerful people have too much to lose. For a moment, Marcus felt the full weight of their situation. They were being hunted through underground passages by professional killers, while the evidence they died to protect sat uselessly in a bank vault that Morrison would probably raid within hours. Eleanor's 43-year sacrifice would amount to nothing. But then Marcus remembered something else from Afghanistan, how the most important battles weren't won by overwhelming force or political influence. They were won by ordinary people who refused to quit when quitting would have been reasonable. "The bank key isn't just evidence," he said slowly. "It's leverage. Morrison can't access that safe deposit box without either killing you or proving you're incompetent, but he can't do either while the whole country is watching." Eleanor looked confused. "The story's been killed. No one's watching." Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time opening a different app, one Morrison's people might not have anticipated. Ever hear of live streaming? Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. Social media. Every hiking forum, outdoor enthusiast group, and wilderness guide network I belong to. Thousands of people who know me personally, trust my judgment, and don't take orders from federal agencies. Marcus positioned the camera carefully. Morrison can silence CNN, but he can't silence everyone. He hit the broadcast button and began speaking directly to the camera. "This is Bear McKinnon, broadcasting live from underground tunnels in Glacier National Park. I'm with Eleanor Whitmore, who's been targeted for assassination because she has evidence of government cover-ups that killed American citizens." Eleanor joined him in the frame, her face gaunt but resolute as she began telling her story: Jimmy Clearwater's murder, the buried documents, Morrison's 43-year campaign of silence. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, decades of suppressed truth finally finding an audience. The viewer count climbed steadily. Hundreds, then thousands of people watching their underground confession. Comments flooded in from wilderness guides who'd worked with Marcus, environmentalists who'd heard rumors about Glacier's cover-ups, ordinary citizens outraged by what they were witnessing. But the flashlight beams behind them were getting brighter. Marcus kept the stream running while helping Eleanor toward the left tunnel branch. "We need to keep moving. They're gaining ground." "Wait." Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Look at the comments." Marcus glanced at the phone screen and saw something that changed everything. "Bear, this is Sheriff Collins, Flathead County. We've got teams mobilizing now. Keep broadcasting your location." "McKinnon, FBI field team overriding federal shutdown. En route to your coordinates." "Eleanor, this is Tom Clearwater, Jimmy's nephew. The family's been waiting 40 years for this. Don't give up." The live stream had accomplished what Marcus's initial messages couldn't. It had created too much public attention for Morrison to suppress. Thousands of witnesses were now invested in their survival, demanding action from authorities who couldn't afford to ignore such visible political pressure. Marcus heard something new echoing from behind them, voices arguing, operational commands being countermanded. Morrison's team was receiving conflicting orders as their clean extraction became a public relations nightmare. "Eleanor," Marcus said quietly, "I think we just changed the rules of engagement." But they still had to survive long enough for help to arrive. The tunnel forked again 50 yards ahead, but this time water flowed from both passages, which meant multiple escape routes to the surface. Marcus felt a surge of hope until he heard Morrison's voice echoing through the limestone maze with chilling clarity. "Cut the cellular jamming. Let them broadcast." The words carried easily through the stone corridors, followed by confused responses from his operatives. "You heard me? I want every word streamed live." Eleanor stopped crawling, her face reflecting Marcus's growing dread. Morrison wasn't being overwhelmed by their publicity. He was embracing it. He's controlling the narrative, Marcus realized. Whatever's about to happen, he wants witnesses. Morrison's amplified voice filled the tunnels as if he were speaking directly to their streaming audience. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the tragic final chapter of a 43-year psychological break. Eleanor Whitmore suffers from severe dementia and has convinced Mr. McKinnon that her paranoid delusions are reality. The phone's comment section exploded with confusion as Morrison continued his performance. Ms. Whitmore disappeared from her care facility 9 days ago during a documented psychotic episode. She believes she's a former government employee named Fitzgerald and has created elaborate conspiracy theories to cope with her declining mental state. That's not true, Eleanor whispered, but Marcus could see the doubt creeping into viewers' comments. Morrison was dismantling their credibility in real time, using Eleanor's age and medical history against her. The documents she claims to possess are children's drawings she made during art therapy. Morrison's voice continued with practiced authority. The murder victim, James Clearwater, died in 1981 during a routine climbing accident, a tragedy, but hardly a conspiracy. Federal records will confirm everything I'm telling you. Marcus watched their support evaporating as viewers began questioning what they were seeing. Morrison had spent decades preparing for this moment, creating documentation that would support his version while systematically destroying anything that contradicted it. But Eleanor surprised him by pulling herself closer to the camera with renewed determination. Morrison, I know you're listening. Tell them about the Yellowstone toxic waste dumps you helped cover up in '79. Tell them about the ranger who found mercury poisoning in the elk herds and disappeared before he could file his report. For the first time, Morrison's smooth delivery faltered slightly. Eleanor was referencing events that predated their current situation, information she couldn't have gleaned from therapy sessions or dementia-induced fantasies. Tell them about your real name, Daniel Morrison, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. Born Daniel Malik, dishonorably discharged from the Army Corps of Engineers for falsifying environmental impact reports. Changed your identity in 1978 when the Department of Interior needed someone willing to make problems disappear. The tactical lights behind them stopped moving. Morrison was no longer directing his team's advance. He was focused entirely on damage control. But Eleanor wasn't finished. The bank account in Georgetown, she said directly to the camera. Cayman Islands routing number 44789121156. 40 years of payments from corporations whose violations you've buried. $3.7 million as of last month. Marcus stared at her in amazement. How could you possibly know that? Because Jimmy Clearwater wasn't just documenting environmental crimes, Eleanor said with grim satisfaction. He was documenting the financial network that made them possible. Morrison's been taking bribes since before I buried those documents. The comment section shifted dramatically as viewers began demanding verification of Eleanor's specific claims. Banking information, military records, corporate connections, details too precise for dementia patients to fabricate. Morrison's voice returned with barely controlled rage. Enough games. Technical teams jam everything within a 2-mile radius. Tactical units converge on coordinates. Authorization for terminal force approved. The live stream flickered and died as signal jammers activated throughout the area, but Marcus noticed something else happening. Distant sounds carrying through the limestone passages from the surface. Vehicle engines, radio chatter, helicopter rotors, too much activity for Morrison's small team. Someone else is mobilizing, Marcus said. Morrison's not the only one monitoring our broadcast. They crawled toward the sound of rushing water, following the main drainage channel toward what had to be the creek bed. Behind them, multiple tactical lights were advancing from different directions. Morrison's team was boxing them in, but they were also moving with less coordination. The operation was becoming unwieldy as outside authorities began arriving. The tunnel opened abruptly into a natural cavern where underground streams converged before flowing toward the surface. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the rock ceiling 20 feet above, their first glimpse of the outside world in hours. But between them and freedom, 3 figures in tactical gear waited with weapons trained on the tunnel entrance. Morrison himself stood among them, his professional composure finally cracked to reveal cold fury. "Ms. Fitzgerald," he said with venomous precision, "your insurance policy just expired." Marcus calculated angles, distances, and probabilities with the clarity that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Everything he'd learned, every survival skill he'd developed over 20 years in the wilderness, would be tested in the next 30 seconds. The stakes had become life-changing in the most literal sense possible. Chapter 9, the dark moment. The cavern erupted in chaos before Marcus could execute any plan. Morrison's first shot shattered stone inches from Eleanor's head, sending limestone fragments cutting across her face like shrapnel. Marcus lunged sideways, shielding her body with his own as automatic weapons fire exploded through the confined space with deafening intensity. But the gunfire wasn't just coming from Morrison's position. Muzzle flashes erupted from the tunnel behind them as additional operatives emerged from the passages they'd just escaped. Marcus realized with sickening clarity that they'd been herded into a kill zone, driven toward this cavern like prey into a hunter's trap. "Move!" he screamed, half carrying Eleanor toward a narrow ledge beside the underground stream. Water sprayed around them as bullets sparked off wet stone, the ricochet whines mixing with Eleanor's gasps of pain. Marcus felt the sledgehammer impact before he heard the shot that caused it. His left shoulder exploded in fire as a high-velocity round tore through muscle and shattered his clavicle, spinning him sideways into the cavern wall. Eleanor tumbled from his grasp, crying out as her body struck the rocky stream bed. Both targets down, Morrison's voice cut through the ringing in Marcus's ears. "Confirm termination and prepare sanitization protocol." Marcus tried to push himself up, but his left arm wouldn't respond. Blood soaked through his jacket, and when he attempted to crawl toward Eleanor, his vision grayed at the edges. 20 years of wilderness survival, combat experience, and mountain rescue training, all of it meaningless against professional killers with superior positioning and firepower. Eleanor lay motionless beside the stream, blood trickling from her scalp where stone fragments had opened multiple wounds. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, and Marcus realized she might be going into shock from the trauma her 70-year-old body had just endured. "The bank key," Morrison said, approaching with weapon raised. "Remove it from your jacket slowly, or I'll put the next round through Ms. Fitzgerald's spine." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket, feeling the small metal object that represented 43 years of Eleanor's sacrifice. Around them, Morrison's operatives were setting up what looked like explosive charges. They weren't just planning murder, they were planning to collapse this entire cavern and create the unfortunate accident Eleanor had predicted. "You can't make this look like a rescue operation," Marcus managed through gritted teeth. "Too many people saw the live stream." Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. "Mr. McKinnon, you still don't understand how thoroughly you've been outmaneuvered. The live stream was perfectly authentic, right up until the moment it showed 2 confused civilians accidentally triggering an unstable cave system during an illegal midnight exploration." Horror dawned as Marcus grasped the full scope of Morrison's planning. The explosives wouldn't just kill them, they'd destroy any evidence that this had been an execution. Federal investigators would find exactly what Morrison wanted them to find, the tragic remains of a dementia patient and her misguided rescuer, victims of their own reckless adventure into dangerous terrain. "The banking information Eleanor revealed," Marcus said desperately. "People will investigate those claims." "What banking information?" Morrison's smile was predatory. "I'm afraid Ms. Whitmore's delusional ravings about fictional account numbers won't survive technical analysis. Digital forensics will show that portion of the stream was compromised by sophisticated deepfake technology, probably foreign actors attempting to destabilize American institutions by spreading conspiracy theories." Marcus felt something breaking inside his chest that had nothing to do with his gunshot wound. Morrison hadn't just anticipated their every move, he'd prepared countermeasures that would discredit their revelations even after death. The man had spent decades perfecting the art of making truth indistinguishable from fiction. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Marcus with tremendous effort. "The key," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "Not just evidence. Trigger." Marcus frowned, not understanding, but Eleanor's gaze shifted meaningfully toward the explosive charges Morrison's team was positioning around the cavern's support pillars. Her fingers moved slightly, pointing at something Marcus had missed. Additional wiring that seemed to lead upward toward the surface, far too extensive for a simple cave-in. She wasn't pointing at Morrison's explosives. She was pointing at different explosives, older ones, hidden in the rock formations above their heads. Jimmy Clearwater's final insurance policy, installed 43 years ago and triggered remotely by whatever Eleanor had buried in that Georgetown bank vault. Not just documents, a dead man's switch that would expose Morrison's network if Eleanor ever died under suspicious circumstances. But as Marcus tried to signal his understanding, Morrison's boot connected with his wounded shoulder in an explosion of agony that drove consciousness away. His last coherent thought was the terrible irony that Eleanor's ultimate weapon might trigger too late to save either of them. The cavern fell silent except for the sound of running water and Morrison's quiet orders for final preparation.